So today we have Brian Zacharias, who's going to speak on the subject from fundamentalism to unity. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
I just want to ask that nobody say anything until I'm done, because I'm trying to compress 50 years into half an hour. And I'm going to start in high school. My dad was the school principal, and that was difficult. And I paid to go to a Catholic boarding school for grade 12. I took a look at life, like getting involved with girls and the whole 9 yards, and I thought, whoa, this is a bit much. So I told myself I was going to be a priest. So I went to Catholic boarding school, paid for it myself. Went from there to the seminary at the University of Saskatchewan, Saskatoon, St. Pius X Seminary. And, you know, I was sincerely trying to find God. And at the seminary, I came up against a brick wall, to make it short. You know, I almost had a nervous breakdown. I mean, I almost had one in the Catholic boarding school too. I'm inclined to that. But anyway, I got out of there after 3.5 months. The rules and I don't know. I couldn't break through. I couldn't get through it, so I got out. And I went back to school for my BA. And I used to work summers, every summer, to pay my tuition and do all that. I mean, I supported myself on construction, but I think it was the second year in my bachelor program, I was working on a survey crew and on a road, and I was staying in hotel rooms. And I was putting pegs in on the highway to mark where they were supposed to grade the road. And I got this thought that if I put a peg in wrong, somebody's going to have an accident. And, you know, in retrospect, this was a reaction to my take on what I was dealing with. And so I came from a person who could work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, nobody could keep up with me. It was just, I could work. And I came to a place where I couldn't move. And because even though I knew the thought was irrational, it overpowered me. And it overpowered me to the point where I couldn't do anything. And it went to the extent of, if I moved a chair and somebody went to sit on it and they missed it and they fell down, you know, I'd be responsible. So it was a major thing. So eventually I was sent to a psychiatrist, and she committed me to the psychiatric ward in Saskatoon hospital. And I received 7 shock treatments to break that thought pattern. And if you want to understand mental illness, that's a pretty good window into it, of your mind being taken over with a thought. So, you know, that kind of broke the thing. I got out, and I was going up north with my dad fishing. It was May 21st long weekend, and he was taking a fellow teacher. We were going fishing up north. And the place we went up the Hanson Lake Road toward Flin Flon, and we came to a place called Pushquaca Creek, believe it or not. And there's a little campsite there, and we had a boat and motor. And there was ice still on the lake. It's quite cold. The fish were really biting. So we were driving up this river. I'd just gotten out of the hospital, right? So I was a little buzzed or whatever. But I was sitting in the bow of the boat, and I was looking out over the hills there, and I heard my name. It was just clear as a bell. Just like we're sitting here, I heard it. And I went, wow, I looked at my dad, I looked at the other man. His name was Guy Lafleur. Or Pete Lafleur. He's the brother to the hockey player, Guy Lafleur. Anyway, so the motor was going full, fairly full and loud, and I looked at them and they had a blank stare on their face. So I looked out over the hills again and boop, there was again, Brian. So, I didn't, at that point, I was sitting in the bow and I slipped off the bow of the boat into the water. And this water was like freezing cold. It didn't bother me a bit. And I had my fishing rod in my hand, and I paddled around to the side of the boat, and my dad looked down and he says, Brian, what are you doing down there? I said, could you help me out? Got me back in the boat. Of course, they just, I didn't tell anybody what happened, basically I didn't dare. Because I figured, frankly, they're going to think I'm nuts. And I didn't have a very good resume as, getting out. So I decided to play my cards kind of close, and I didn't say anything. And basically I didn't say anything to anybody for several years, because when an event happens like this in your life, it takes a long time to compute. You can't compute it in the moment. It just doesn't happen. But anyway, in the process, I fell in love with my wife, and I was in university, and I announced one day, I said, look, we're leaving. And my friends said, where are you going? I said, I'm going back to the land. They said, really? I said, yeah. So I had a professor at university, Ken Schramm, and he taught a class on normalcy or abnormality. That was right up my alley, right? And he quit his tenureship at the university. He quit. And I says, Ken, and he had a party, we drank wine and gave away all his books. And I says, Ken, where are you going? He says, I'm going to Argentina, back to the land. I says, really? Yeah. So I announced to my wife, at that point, we're going to Argentina. And she was in teacher's college, and she said, well, I only got 3 weeks left. Can't you wait? I said, no, I can't wait. I got to get out of here. So, she was loyal to me to a fault. She let me get away with it. We got in the car and we headed out to Argentina. We lived on the beach there. It's an alternate community, and 1970. Anyway, we lived on the beach. I worked on Hugh Herbison's house. I went skinny dipping in Chuck Valentine's pond. I mean, it was a totally different, alternate place. Anyway, one day we were in town, and we looked at Burns Realty, and there was a place, 50 acres, house and workshop, $9,500. I said to my wife, let's go get it, and we did. She had the money. Anyway, we've been there ever since. And then she got pregnant. And I realized at that point that, up to that point, you might think you could step out the back door, but I knew, no, you can't step out anymore. So I started seeking at that time. I never followed my name being called, but I started to understand, and I started to believe that that was God calling my name. And so a friend of mine was from Saskatchewan. I heard by the grapevine that he had become a Jesus freak. And his name was Mickey Clausen. So I wrote him a letter and I says, hey, what's going on? So he sent me a book. Anyway, I started believing in Christianity, and I went to the churches in town. And, you know, inevitably in each church, over the years, I came up against a blockage where, you know, in my mind, things should be moving along, but they're not. They're controlled. So I ended up getting hooked up with a alternate group, and we built a big Christian commune out in Spokane Valley while my family was being born. And I spent a lot of time out there because that was my spiritual journey, right? And we built it all by hand. And there were all rumors around town that it was a cult and all that, and there was sexual stuff going on there, and you know, it wasn't, and there weren't any drugs. And it was Bible-based. There's a Bible on the table, and there was prayer, and it was fairly unique because there was no control. There was no, somebody wanted to pray, they say, hey, let's pray. Somebody want to read the Bible. Somebody want to have communion, let's have communion. So it was pretty free. Very unstructured, and somehow it did fall apart, probably because of that. It's a bit of a gamble when you go that route. But in the process, you know, I became a total Bible believer, you know, fundamentalist totally. I mean, every word was the Word of God. Right? And I grabbed onto that because my life just didn't make sense, and that made sense for me. So I grabbed it with both hands. And I lived it. You know, I lived it totally. I marched against the gay pride parades and everything else, but not because I hate gays. It's far from the truth. I just was thinking that this is God's word. I'm not supposed to be doing that. It's not good. So I stood up by myself with my sign. It was quite an experience, you know. Walking down the street and there's like 200 of them and one of me, and I'm walking and they're yelling at me, what Bible do you read, and all this, you know. I had a few good conversations with some of them. But as my family was being born, I have 3 daughters, and I was working on construction, and you know, I didn't have much money or anything. I was self-employed all my life. But I had a little truck, and I was building a rack on my truck one day. And I heard this message. I didn't hear it audibly this time, but it said to me, it was very clear, and it didn't come from in my mind, it came from outside my mind, and I know the difference. And it said to me, build it strong, right? So I did. I said, well, I better obey this thing. I built a really strong boy. I had that little rack, and I gusseted it with 3/4 inch 2x4s and everything else. And I said, there. And then I was doing a job out in Roslyn, a concrete job, trawling cement till 4 in the morning. A couple of years later, by myself, totally exhausted. I come from Roslyn, and the old Tagum Bridge, before they built the new one, it was single lane, right? I come, and I'm on the other side, and I'm dead tired. And the same voice, same thought says, rest. I said, no, my house is only 10 minutes away here. I'm not resting. I went to drive across the bridge, and I hit the curb. My eyes were open, but everything went black. And I hit the curb, and my little Datsun flipped right on its roof. And I would have had a broken neck, because the cab wasn't like that, and I'm tall. And that roof rack saved my life. So you want to wonder, you know, who's doing what here? And that's not the only thing. I mean, I used to commute back and forth to this commune, and my poor wife, she was abandoned half the time because I was seeking God. Anyway, I go up there, and one day I was coming home, and I smoked, and I drank coffee, not booze. In fact, I drank a lot of coffee, and I smoked a lot of cigarettes for about 30 years. 35. Anyway, I was coming from Spokane, and it was my habit to go downtown and have a coffee at Casey restaurant and have a smoke. We smoked in the cafes those days. So, same voice, same sound, same message said to me, go home. I was on the Taggum Bridge. I said, okay. So I went home, and I went in we had a little beat up little log cabin. It was like from the 30s. And I went and made an instant coffee, rolled a smoke, sat at the table, and started, now why am I here? And in the back of the kitchen, there's a utility room, and in there was an electric heater and an extension cord going up the wall, and the wall was not drywall, and there were clothes hanging on nails, and they caught fire. So I opened the door, and here's flames coming out, and I said, oh, that's why I'm supposed to come home. And I got a hose, and I put it out, and I threw the stuff off the porch. But I didn't have any insurance, because nobody would insure me. Anyway, that saved my house. So my life is saved, my house is saved. God has called me. So, there's nothing on this earth that's going to stop me from doing what I'm doing. I had messages on my vehicles, and I ran twice for the Christian Heritage Party, once for the Family Coalition Party, 3 times for school board, all on this thing of the Constitution and the Bible. That was my platform. It was very interesting, to say the least, because I was saying stuff that just doesn't get said. And I felt that in the arena, the public arena, the biggest battle goes on in the political arena. And I figured, well, I'm going to get Satan in the political arena. And I challenged what I considered to be Satan. And I got 1% of the vote. 300 votes once in 1993, and I think it's 300 and some in 1997. I paid my own registration, and there's a whole bunch of stories that go with that, but I don't want to run this too long. So I did all that, and there were times when at the commune I would fast and a lot. I wouldn't eat, and I beat myself up basically, so that my spirit would be out there and not I'm all comfortable here. That was my way of dealing with it. And so one night, for instance, everybody's sleeping, and I spend the night carrying sacks of cement up the hill to the cabin, and they get up in the morning and say, oh, it's a miracle, look at the cement's here. Yeah, it's a miracle, all right. But that was my way of praying, that's what I did. So there was a time when I didn't pray. I prayed and I fasted, and I decided to walk up the mountain by myself, and I got up fairly high from the cabin. The cabin is above the Spokane River, just up from the footbridge there, below the cliff. Anyway, and it's totally abandoned now, but I walked up the mountain, and I knelt down, and I was going to say something, but I didn't say anything, and somebody said something, and that somebody was about 20 feet away in the trees. I didn't see that somebody, but the voice said, I'll be with you even unto the end of the world. That was clear as a bell. And I identified that voice as Jesus, because that's who I was serving, and that's in the Bible. It's a testimony of Jesus. Have you received the testimony of Jesus? The testimony is what I'm doing right now. I'm doing a testimony. I'm speaking. And he spoke. And again, it took several years for that to, did he really say that? I mean, you second guess yourself. Well, I came down, and, again, like people say, why do you do what you do? Well, because, but the other thing that was involved is a considerable amount of fear, and that was because I took a biblical name of Ezekiel, and Ezekiel was told that he was appointed a watchman, and he was to shout warning, and if he didn't, the sins would be on his head. And so I made a point of everybody I worked for, and I'm self-employed, and I work for a lot of people, and I preached to each one. And I got quite a few jobs, actually, and I worked hard and whatever, and I got through. But it came to a point where my family grew up. My children didn't, follow my strict fundamentalist teachings. And again, I was at the point of breaking down because my world was falling apart. My belief system was falling apart. The last time I stood up against the gay pride parade, I got angry because I said to Jesus, I said, look, I'm here by myself and you're not doing anything. And I'm not doing this anymore. So, I didn't. And so gradually all that fundamentalism that I had built up in me and lived, like full tilt with all I had, and I'm not exaggerating, everything I had, up to the point of death, because I was threatened a few times. And so it gradually broke down, and I realized, and I started reading the Bible, and I started reading things in there that, no. God didn't do that, Jesus didn't say that. It just isn't in their character from what I understand. So I had to eliminate all that. I haven't read the Bible for about 6, 7, 8, 9 years. I used to read it every day. And so what am I going to do? I've got this fundamentalism, so, what am I going to do now? There's a gap, right? There's an emptiness. Couldn't sleep. I had PTSD. I still function. I'm tough. Sleep. Go 2 nights without sleeping, I still function. So I started looking in all the places that I didn't dare look before. All those places were of the devil. This would be very much of the devil. It's not fundamentalist. Buddhism, I checked that out. I went to a few meditations. I like Buddhism. I think it's great. Gradually over, I don't have PTSD now, but I can have sleepless nights because I'm processing. I'm processing the journey I'm on and who I'm talking to and what I'm doing, and I have that habit, and it takes time. But gradually it came. This is kind of the theme of my talk, right? I mean, how did I get to be a fundamentalist? How do I get out of being a fundamentalist? And how do I get here? And essentially, what takes over is neither God nor Jesus. I, to this day, cannot understand how, while I was this extreme fundamentalist, the first time God just called me because he felt sorry for me. And Jesus talked to me the second time and he encouraged me. So I thought, well, what the heck? Why did they do that? Why am I out there, fire and brimstone, hell and high water going on day after day, and now they don't say anything, right? So I, to this day, don't understand it. But I did reach this place where it's not a question of, I believe that, because of our human condition, we spend a lot of time speculating on afterlife and everything else. I don't so much anymore. I'm more about, humanity. You know, what makes us human? Who are we? And, you know, whatever happens after is essentially not in my control anyway. So that's how, and it's not that I don't believe. I think I should make something clear here. I do believe. But I don't believe, like, for instance, Jesus was born of a virgin. I just don't believe it. I read a library full of books on the subject, and, you know, I took classes on the subject at college. I studied it thoroughly. No, he wasn't. He was probably a little illegitimate child, and, you know, that whole story came into Matthew, and he was very much a gifted fundamentalist. He's very much a gifted preacher. He was crucified, as far as I can tell. He rose because he talked to me. So whatever the Bible says, you know, in that regard, I have more faith than I think the Bible, because that puts me on the same level as him. And that requires me to do more, rather than having this God out there that's going to solve all my problems. So anyway, that is what I wanted to say. And, you know, it's nice to be able to say it. And, you know, I really would like, if anybody wants to comment, or we can have a bit of a discussion, maybe I can get enlightened a little more. Maybe all of us can get enlightened. I just appreciate this opportunity.
How did you hear about unity?
About your what?
Unity? I think through Michael. Michael, he, you know, I was pretty good friends with him. And I know I went to Judy's Course in Miracles. So he said he was going here, and then I started going. And that's how I did it.
Can you tell us more about where you're at right now?
Well,
I've got lots of questions about that myself.
Where I'm at is essentially this. You know, whatever, I've lived 70 years on this planet. I would like to do another 10 or 20 if possible. My basic fundamentalist belief at this time is to lighten my load and anyone else's load that I come across, you know, like that's essentially it, you know, love your neighbors yourself, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You know, there's so much going on, not just here, but it appears out there, and, you know, we grasp at trying to understand it. I don't spend so much time at that. I mean, I just say, hey guys, you want to talk to me, I'm here, but if not, I'm just going to carry on. So far, nothing. You know?
Yeah, I keep wondering, of course, where we come from and where we go to, and what are we doing here?
Well, those are big questions that there are a lot of theories about. There's no cut and dried answer there.
Well, there's a lot of theories about Jesus as well. And
That is absolutely true.
Yeah, so
You know, so
nothing.
you got to pick your theory, but you're not going to prove any of it, basically.
Last week I didn't come here because I was listening to a program on CBC in the morning, and they were talking about Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which I read a long time ago when I was in school. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, Jewish. I actually saw him live once, and quite an amazing person. He was also a psychiatrist, and he. I think to summarize his book, he says that love is where what we need and what we're looking for, and will give meaning to our lives. And he says a lot of other stuff too, but that I think is.
I was all about judgment, you know, and righteousness, and I've replaced that, you know.
Which is great.
With love, basically.
I think what's important too, is just to be good to your neighbor without that fear of hell or the reward of heaven, without that having anything to do with it. Just
If
to
you
be a
want,
good person.
if you want to know about a major challenge that I faced, my daughter is a lesbian, my brother is a homosexual, my sister is a lesbian. Okay? I was on the other side of the fence. I was on the judgment side, and I judged them. And my family was split. And, you know, what I did was I went by the Bible, and it says, if you do not hate your mother and father and your brothers and sisters, then you're not worthy of me, and you have to take up your cross. And so I did. Well, that's more important. But I had to come to a reconciliation with all of them and accept them. And that accomplishes way more than I would ever accomplish with the judgment.
I think that's the problem with a lot of religions,
Yeah.
that they are so expecting us to be judgmental.
Yeah.
You don't believe the same thing I believe, you're no good, so I'm gonna kill you and throw you out.
I call it insecurity.
Insecurity. Yeah, that's a good.
That's insecure.
all
They're
goes
insecure.
Same line
Yeah.
goes all along.
Insecure. This is the way it is, and don't question it, and don't, you know, otherwise we're gonna, you know, we're gonna judge you.
Yeah.
So,
Brian,
yeah.
at the beginning of your talk, you told us that you were when you were last year in high school, you paid for yourself to go to,
Mhm.
because you were looking for God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you go back in your life and tell me at what stage you knew you were looking for God?
No. Well, I was in the Catholic Church, right? And,
Were
you know,
your family Catholics?
yeah, my dad was Catholic. He became Catholic because he fell in love with my mother, who was Mennonite.
Mhm.
My grandfather on my dad's, or my mother was Catholic, my dad was Mennonite, sorry. My grandfather on my dad's side was a Mennonite minister. I missed all that because I was raised Catholic, and, you know, Mennonites and Catholics don't get along because Catholics used to persecute Mennonites. And so anyway, there was a split there, but I was quite, you know, at catechism, for instance, you know, here's a priest. Well, in one instance, there's a nun that says, you know what hell is like, and I'm about 7 years old. She says, you know what eternity is like? Well, eternity is trying to fill an ocean one drop at a time, and that's how long you're going to be in hell if you die with a mortal sin on your soul. Oh, holy shit. What do you do? You know, you're a kid, right? You're looking for meaning. You're looking for something.
But those are about the devil or hell. They're not about God.
Well,
Where's God coming?
I know, but you know, like,
Or love,
yeah.
or,
And then another point, you're taking catechism, and you're becoming, you know, an adult, and you're told that, you know, sex is just for procreation, and if it's pleasure, it's a sin. Well, you know, you get a certain amount of confusion after a while, you know. I just said, well, I'm out, you know. So that's when, because of that, and because of, you know, I get various crushes on various girls, but I would be too shy. So I said, well, this is way too much trouble. So I decided to become religious with that in my, well, in grade 11, when the school situation, my dad's situation, everything else, I wasn't a very good student. I was apparently low IQ, believe it or not. I didn't do the technical stuff well. So my dad was like, you know, he failed me one grade actually. You know, there was stuff going on that was pretty rough in the family. So that, all of those things drove me to that. Either that or drugs. And I tried drugs a bit. You know, I ended up on a train going to Vancouver at one point. My wife, live-in girlfriend, had gone to Europe, and I got on the train, went to Vancouver, and got involved with a bunch of pushers, and they started feeding me booze and hashish and LSD, and I didn't give a hoot, and I just took it. And I went on a major trip, got over it, and that was one of the things. There's several things that drove me to, like I went, as a Christian, I went like 20 years not to drop alcohol, you know, but I smoked cigarettes and drank coffee. Now I have a beer and I don't smoke cigarettes and I smoke a bit of pot and I feel a lot better. So, you know, in the old school thing, that's all bad. So, you know, they talk about being born again, right? And yeah, you got to be born again, and fairly often, I might say. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck, and that's not a good idea. Life is not stagnant. If a person's life is stagnating, they got to do something. They got to risk something. I don't care. They really do.
But the born again, I thought, has to do with believing in Christianity or Jesus or something. That's when you get born again.
But think about it. The born again, being born again, it's not necessarily. I mean, New Age goes into that.
Shamanism is about that.
Yeah, these are all.
Well, shamanism is about, like, part of the shamanistic
yeah.
rebirth or the
Yeah.
alchemical rebirth is to
Yeah.
die and be reborn.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
There's another way of saying it too, you know, unless you become as a little child, you can't enter into the kingdom of heaven.
I used to rail against that one.
Do you?
Not anymore, but I used to in church. Pastor would say, "You got to come with your little child." You try and say something intelligent, and he'd shut you down. You know. The best church service I ever attended was actually for a while in the Covenant Church and for a while in Kootenai Christian Fellowship, where they had an open pulpit. You know, and every Sunday you could get up, and if you had something to share, you could. But in both cases, either the elders or the pastor got nervous and shut her down because of control, because of fear, because of all that.
Did you ever go to a Quaker meeting in
Yeah.
Atlanta?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
I went through a lot of the same, more or less. I was always searching. Going to church Christian church was the only thing I knew, and then coming over here and searching, and then I went to church again. And then one day I asked the pastor, well, what is God? Who is God? And the pastor said, oh, you have to believe, and you have to pray, and you have to... And I thought, what kind of a shit is that? What kind of an answer? Forget it. I never went to church again after that.
No.
But I was still searching. Still, I am searching.
We can't help it.
Huh?
We can't help it.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though there are a lot of people that are not, I think. They just live from day to day and don't think about it.
It's hard to tell. You know, you can run into the biggest redneck beer drinking whatever guy, and he's got some major spiritual insights.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it comes from life, you know. That's where it comes from. Life experience. Your spirituality is shaped from your life experience, right?
Ah.
So, yeah. And we sure, I don't think we should, at least myself, I used to think that I had to have the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, but that's not so important. I mean, that's kind of a bad statement, but, you know, given the size of the universe and everything else that's going on, I think my brain would have to be a little bigger to understand it all.
So I want to make a comment about all of this from my perspective. Our culture has gone through a dark age of forgetting, and there's a lot of, you know, karma, whatever, heaviness, where a lot of political control mechanisms had the monopoly on God, and there was the Council of Nicaea, and so there's a lot of undoing now, And when people had spiritual experiences, like Carl Jung, his famous quote was, religion is a defense against the spiritual experience. So when you have the spiritual experience, you want answers. Your ego is like, I need answers. So then we jump into a religion because it makes us feel secure. And so now, in this age, we have more and more people who are able to find their God because they have more choices. Spirituality is about loving yourself, and it's not so much about trying to find a religion to feel secure. So there is this, and often, you know, the Bible, people throw it out completely, like, I love the Bible, well, now I'm throwing it out, it's like black and white, but certainly there's a lot of beautiful little cherries that I hear of in the Bible that are really amazing.
They come up all the time in my mind. I haven't checked it,
Yeah.
but I've cherry-picked it.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is such a beautiful thing because so many of us are still fundamentalists in this world because it satisfies it gives us a sense of security. And so what you've gone through, you can certainly help people who are still fundamentalists in their mind.
I try.
You do your part.
They're hard to move, I'll tell you. They're really stubborn.
And this word in the Bible, apocalypse, I believe is the great undoing of all of the lies. And I think that's one metaphor that I take from apocalypse, the great undoing.
Yeah,
And so here we all have our own personal apocalypse, back to love.
that's a good thing.
The great undoing.
Bo, I'm kind of curious I'm kind of curious on your take on this thing. I want a few words.
Well, first of all, I really thank you for just describing your whole story, which is very amazing. Yeah, and to me, we do come in with a sense of seeking, wanting to know, and we get interrupted by our own conditioning that we go through as children. And that conditioning leads us places. And then if it isn't appropriate, then you have to seek. But I see that it's always the experience in our lives that shows us what is true. It's what when you hear, as you have described, that's a very major point, marker in your life, which is sending you to looking after you, and it shows you right there that not just you, but all of us have this inner guidance that is always present, always with us, and it really depends on how willing we are to listen, whether or not we hear it.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't believe in accidents either, so I think we actually plan our lives before we come. And it's the purpose for being here in the first place is to overcome things that we need to. We can see it from the bigger picture when we're not in body.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we plan our lives and then we.
I don't hold the view of reincarnation. I don't totally understand it. I don't necessarily believe in it, but I hold the view of receiving from ancestors way with that back, through our being of things and of experiences. I don't find that I have to include that to, round out my experience, but I'm not saying it's not so. I'm just saying I can't get a handle on it.
Yeah, supposedly there is no time, so
Yeah.
all of existence is happening in the now, and that would include any
Yeah,
kind
okay.
of past lives. If I don't think we just get one shot at this.
I do. I'm gonna make it good.
I don't think it's linear either myself.
No.
That's okay.
So Brian, thank you so much. It was a blessing to have you. I'm really glad I was here today.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, me too. I wish we could talk more about it.
Oh, we-
Yes,
Why are we
we
so
can.
time limited?
We can talk more
Well, you
later, thank
can.
you so much.
Say, I'll call you.